2 months after my daughter-in-law dismissed everything I'd done for her family, she showed up at my door, demanding my help again. This time, I didn't reach for my checkbook. I looked her in the eye and reminded her of the one thing she wished she'd never said. The Saturday sun beat down on the backyard patio in suburban Denver. I was sitting at the wooden picnic table filling out a check for $1,200 to cover the quarterly property taxes for my son Brian and his wife, Samantha. I had been doing this twice a year since Brian lost his corporate job 2 years ago and took a lower-paying role at a local logistics firm. Beside the checkbook lay the spare key to their house, which I used 3 mornings a week when I came over at 6 to babysit their 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Samantha walked out of the kitchen carrying a tray of iced tea. She set it down with a sharp clatter that splashed liquid onto my open ledger. I carefully wiped the paper with a napkin, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Brian was nearby, adjusting the lawnmower, pretending not to hear the tension building between us. "I was talking to my mother this morning," Samantha said, leaning against the wooden railing with her arms crossed tightly over her linen blouse. Her parents gave her brother a brand new crossover vehicle for his birthday. Meanwhile, we are driving an 8-year-old sedan with a failing alternator. I looked up calmly from my checkbook. "I paid for Lily's preschool tuition this entire year, Samantha. And I am writing this check right now so your county taxes do not go into delinquency." Samantha let out a short, harsh laugh that cut right through the warm summer air. "What have you ever done for us, Eleanor? Paying a few small bills here. And there is not real help. You have never actually helped us when it counted." I stared at her for 2 long seconds. I did not raise my voice or argue. Instead, I slowly capped my pen, slid the blank check back into the book, and picked up the silver spare key from the table. The silence following my departure lasted through Sunday, but Monday morning arrived with its usual demands. For 3 years, my routine was rigid and unquestioned. I woke at 5, drove 15 minutes through the cool Colorado morning, and unlocked Brian's front door with my key. I cooked breakfast, dressed Lily, and made sure Brian and Samantha left for work on time without the stress of morning chaos. They had come to expect this service as a basic entitlement rather than a generous sacrifice. When I arrived at 6 o'clock, I parked on the street instead of pulling into the driveway. Sitting in my sedan, I thought about Samantha's words from Saturday. She had minimized every dollar, every hour, and every meal I provided over the years. I realized then that my constant presence was not fostering gratitude. It was generating resentment and entitlement. They viewed my contribution as nothing because it came without a formal price tag attached. I walked up the front steps and tried the brass doorknob. It was unlocked as usual. Inside the kitchen was in complete disarray. Dirty dishes filled the sink and empty takeout containers littered the granite island. Samantha was at the counter frantically searching for her car keys while trying to pack a lunch for Lily. Brian stood near the coffee maker staring blankly at his phone. Neither of them greeted me with a genuine thank you. Samantha merely glanced at the clock and sighed heavily. "You're 5 minutes late, Eleanor. I have an 8 o'clock meeting across town and Lily isn't even dressed yet. Can you hurry up?" Her tone lacked any warmth or appreciation. Brian stayed silent, refusing to look up from his screen. They did not notice that I was not carrying my canvas tote bag filled with home-cooked meals for their fridge. I took a deep breath, hung my coat on the hall rack, and observed the chaotic home they took for granted. By Wednesday evening, I decided that quiet compliance was no longer an option. I spent 30 years working as a head registrar at a community college managing complex schedules and enforcing strict institutional rules. I knew how to establish firm boundaries without engaging in loud shouting matches. If Samantha truly believed I had never helped them, then it was time to let her experience what absolute lack of support actually felt like in practice. I called Brian on my home landline while sitting in my quiet living room. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice sounding tired and distracted by background television noise. "Brian, I am calling to inform you of a change in my schedule," I said, clearly keeping my voice even and professional. "Starting next week, I will no longer be available to watch Lily on weekday mornings. I have joined the local botanical garden committee, and my volunteer shifts begin at 7 a.m. There was a long, stunned silence on the line before Brian finally spoke. Wait, what? Mom, you can't do that. Samantha and I both work early. Daycare centers in this city charge over $1,500 a month for morning coverage, and most have a 6-month waiting list. You will need to make alternative arrangements, I replied calmly. Also, I will not be paying the property tax bill this quarter. You and Samantha need to adjust your personal budget to cover your household obligations. Mom, is this about what Samantha said on Saturday? Brian asked, his tone shifting from confusion to annoyance. She was just stressed out. You are taking things way too personally. I am simply taking her words at face value, I answered. She stated that I have never helped you. Therefore, I am removing any potential confusion moving forward. Have a good evening, Brian. I set the receiver down gently before he could argue further. The real impact of my decision began to show within 2 weeks. Without my morning presence, Brian and Samantha were forced to hire a private morning nanny on extremely short notice. The expense was staggering for their tight budget, forcing them to cut back on their daily luxuries and frequent dining out. On top of that, the county property tax deadline was approaching rapidly, and the reminder bill sat unopened on their kitchen counter. I drove past their house on my way to my volunteer shift at the Denver Botanic Gardens. Their driveway was empty, but the grass was overgrown and trash bins remained on the curb long past collection day. In the past, I would have pulled into the driveway, mowed the lawn, and rolled the bins back to the garage without being asked. Now, I drove straight past without stopping. Later that afternoon, I met my longtime friend Sarah for lunch at a small bistro downtown. Sarah had watched me exhaust myself for years, running errands for my son's household. You look remarkably rested, Eleanor, Sarah said, pouring lemon water into my glass. Are you sure you aren't feeling guilty about pulling back? Not in the slightest, I replied, buttering a warm roll. For years, I believed I was helping my son build a stable foundation. But by covering their shortfall every month, I was actually enabling their irresponsibility. Samantha believed my money and time fell from the sky without effort. While we ate, my phone buzzed twice in my purse. It was a text message from Brian asking if I could transfer $800 to cover their overdue utility bill to prevent a service disconnection. I read the message carefully, set the phone back into my bag without typing a response, and continued my conversation with Sarah. They needed to face the harsh reality of their own finances without my financial safety net beneath them. A month after I stopped my morning routine, Brian arrived at my front door unannounced on a rainy Tuesday evening. His shoes were muddy, and he looked thoroughly exhausted with dark circles hanging heavy under his eyes. He stood on my covered porch holding a soggy cardboard box containing a few of my old baking pans I had lent them months ago. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked quietly, shivering slightly in the damp evening air. I opened the door and stepped aside, allowing him into the entry hallway, but I did not invite him to sit down in the living room. "What brings you here tonight, Brian?" He set the box on the floor and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Samantha and I are drowning right now. The nanny costs us $400 a week. The property tax penalty fee was tacked on yesterday because we missed the due date. Samantha is furious at me, and I'm working overtime just to keep us afloat." I looked at my son with a mixture of sadness and firm resolve. "Brian, you earn a respectable salary. Samantha works full-time as a marketing specialist. The issue is not your income. It is your lifestyle choices and your complete lack of appreciation for the support you were receiving." Samantha didn't mean what she said. Brian insisted, taking a step closer. She was just venting because her brother gets so much help from his in-laws. "Please, Mom, just write the check for the taxes this one last time. We'll pay you back next year." "No," I said firmly, looking him directly in the eyes. "You have taken my generosity for granted for far too long. If I pay this bill, you will learn nothing. You are a 34-year-old man, Brian. It is time for you and your wife to manage your own household without expecting me to finance it." Refusing Brian was emotionally difficult. but it brought a profound sense of clarity and freedom that I had not experienced since my husband passed away 6 years ago. I stopped spending my weekends waiting for their phone calls or worrying about their domestic troubles. Instead, I poured my energy into restructuring my own life, focusing entirely on my personal interests and financial security. I booked a 2-week guided tour through the Pacific Northwest for early autumn, a trip I had postponed for 3 years, because I was afraid of leaving Brian and Samantha without childcare. I also hired a local contractor to renovate my sunroom into an art studio, investing my savings into my own home, rather than funneling it into their bank accounts. One afternoon, while purchasing painting supplies at a local shop, I ran into Samantha's mother, Brenda. We had always maintained a polite but distant relationship. Brenda was dressed immaculately, carrying a designer handbag, and looked slightly uncomfortable when she noticed me standing in the aisle. "Eleanor?" "Hello," Brenda said, smoothly adjusting her scarf. "Brian mentioned you've been quite busy lately with your own activities." "I have indeed," I replied with a polite smile. "It's wonderful to have time for my own passions after so many years." Brenda cleared her throat nervously. "Samantha mentioned that things have been a bit stressful at their house lately. She was hoping you might reconsider helping with Lily again. You know how demanding Samantha's career is." "I am very aware," I said calmly. "However, as Samantha clearly stated to me, I have never actually helped them. Since my efforts were non-existent in her eyes, I decided it was best to make that perception an absolute reality. It saves everyone from unnecessary confusion." Brenda's mouth opened slightly in surprise, but she found no suitable response. I smiled, politely, wished her a pleasant afternoon, and carried my art supplies straight to the checkout counter. The true test of their desperation came in mid-August when the summer heat reached its peak in Denver. Brian called me at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning while I was painting in my newly renovated sunroom. His voice was frantic, accompanied by the sound of heavy traffic in the background. "Mom, Samantha's car breakdown was far worse than we thought," Brian said quickly, talking over himself. "The transmission completely blew out on the highway. The repair shop says it will cost $4,000 to fix, or we have to buy another vehicle immediately." "That is unfortunate news, Brian," I said, laying down my paintbrush on the wooden tray. "Do you have emergency savings set aside for auto repairs? You know, we don't have $4,000 lying around." Brian snapped his composure, slipping completely. "Samantha can't take the bus to her corporate office, and I can't drop Lily off at daycare without a second vehicle. We need you to lend us your SUV for the next month or two while we figure this out." My SUV was a well-maintained vehicle that I owned outright. In the past, I would have handed over the keys, instantly adjusting my own life to accommodate their sudden crisis. "No, Brian," I answered evenly. "I use my vehicle daily for my volunteer work errands and upcoming travel plans. I will not leave myself without transportation." "Mom, this is ridiculous," Brian shouted into the receiver. "You're doing this out of pure spite. You have a perfectly good car sitting in your garage and you won't even help your own son when our family is in a real crisis. You have credit cards and bank loan options available to you," I replied calmly. "When you treat my assistance as worthless, you forfeit the privilege of asking for it when things get difficult. Do not ask me again." 2 days later, Brian drove his old sedan into my driveway and stepped out, looking furious. Samantha was sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield, refusing to look toward my house. Brian marched up to the front porch and rang the doorbell repeatedly until I pulled open the solid wood door. "We need to talk right now," Mom, Brian said, stepping uninvited into the foyer. "This whole situation has gone way too far. Samantha missed 2 major client meetings yesterday because of the car situation. We are falling behind on everything." I stood my ground in the hallway, keeping my posture straight and composed. Then Samantha should be addressing her issues with practical solutions. Brian, rather than standing on my porch demanding my assets. Samantha suddenly opened the car door, walked briskly up the walkway, and stepped into the foyer beside Brian. Her face was flushed with anger, but her eyes held a distinct edge of anxiety. "Eleanor." This is completely unreasonable, Samantha said, her voice tight and trembling slightly. You are intentionally sabotaging our family over a single offhand comment I made 2 months ago. Families are supposed to support each other during hard times. I looked at Samantha with a cold, steady gaze that made her pause. Support is given willingly out of love and mutual respect, Samantha. It is not an obligation to be demanded while you publicly mock the person providing it. You stood in your backyard and mocked every financial contribution and every hour of labor I gave to your household. I was stressed, Samantha yelled defensively. You never let us forget that you're helping. You make us feel like charity cases. I never asked for praise, I replied smoothly. I only asked for basic courtesy. But since you claimed I did nothing, I simply gave you exactly what you claimed to have received nothing. The confrontation reached its peak when Brian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, slapping it onto my entry table. It was an itemized list of their monthly expenses, highlighted in yellow, along with a loan agreement he had printed from the internet. Look at these numbers, Mom, Brian demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. We are $4,000 in the red this month alone. If you don't co-sign this personal loan or give us the money directly, we are going to lose our house within 6 months. Is that what you want? To see your son and granddaughter on the street? I picked up the piece of paper, looked at the numbers briefly, and then folded it neatly in half. I looked at my son, seeing clearly for the first time how deeply his entitlement had blinded him to reality. You will not lose your house, Brian, I said, with absolute authority. You own 2 expensive brand-name golf sets. You subscribe to 4 different luxury gym memberships, and you take 2 out-of-state vacations every year. You are in financial trouble because you refuse to live within your actual means, relying on my wallet to cover your vanity. I opened my purse, pulled out my checkbook and the silver spare key I had taken back weeks ago, and laid them on the table beside his printed paper. I am taking back every implicit promise of financial backing I ever gave you, I stated firmly. I am removing my name as a secondary user on your emergency credit card today. I am canceling the backup insurance policy I held for your home. From this moment forward, you are entirely independent adults. If you lose your home, it will be due to your own choices, not my refusal to fund them. Samantha stared at the silver key on the table, her face draining of color as the reality of my words finally hit her. 6 months passed before the dust finally settled. Facing absolute financial collapse without my intervention, Brian and Samantha were forced to make drastic changes. They sold their second luxury car, canceled their expensive memberships, and enrolled Lily in an affordable community preschool program. Samantha took on freelance marketing projects during the evenings, while Brian picked up weekend shifts at his logistics firm to clear their accrued debts. The adjustment was painful for them, but for the first time in their adult lives, they were forced to take full responsibility for their financial obligations. The sense of unearned privilege that had poisoned our relationship slowly evaporated under the weight of real-world accountability. In late October, Brian called me on a Sunday afternoon. His tone was vastly different from the angry demands of the summer. It was quiet, grounded, and respectful. "Hi, Mom," Brian said softly. "I was wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner this evening. No favors, no money talk. Just a family dinner. Samantha is cooking." I considered his offer for a moment before answering. "I would like that, Brian. I can bring an apple pie." When I arrived at their house that evening, the environment was completely transformed. The house was clean, the lawn was properly manicured by Brian, and Samantha greeted me at the front door with a quiet, sincere smile. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor, Samantha said, gently stepping aside to let me enter. "The house smells like fresh roast, and Lily is eager to show you her drawings." We sat down for dinner together as equals. I maintained my firm boundary. My checkbook remained safely at home, and my spare key was never reissued. I was no longer their financial safety net or their unpaid domestic servant. I was simply a grandmother visiting her family respected and valued, precisely because I had refused to allow my kindness to be treated as nothing.